Ladies and gentlemen, when COVID hit, our only hope was a vaccine. It was a bit of a miracle then when science and technology came together to give us these vaccines in record time. Yes, even back then, there were question marks raised over the speed of this rollout. Question was, were all due diligences being done? But we had an assurance from our governments, from vaccine makers and from the WHO that the vaccines we were getting were absolutely safe. But for the last 1 year, there has been a question. Were they really safe? For the first time, AstraZeneca, the makers of Covishield, have admitted that in rare cases, their vaccine can cause clots. AstraZeneca is facing multiple lawsuits in the UK, and this admission will now open up floodgates of lawsuits and compensation claims across the world. The pharma giant has said that its vaccine had the potential to cause TTS, which is a rare side effect associated with blood clotting. TTS causes blood clots and leads to low blood platelet count. In India, 90% of us have got the Covishield jab. 1.7 billion doses have been administered to all of us so far. Therefore, there are many questions that we have. Like, for instance, are blood clots the only side effect? What about heart attacks? Is it time for India to do a safety review of the vaccine as well? Just by the way, the government of India in 2021 itself had said that 26 potential thermoembolic events or formation of clots in blood vessels had been reported since Covishield began to be administered, which was in sharp contrast to that of Covaxin. Was this an important red flag that was ignored? I'm going across to my guests who are joining me this evening, and I'm going to start by thanking all of them for being here with us on the show. Alex Mitchell is one of the litigants in the case. In the UK, there are 51 litigants in all who have taken AstraZeneca to court. Alex Mitchell, thank you very much for your time here. Dr. Aseem Malhotra is a British Indian cardiologist. He's someone who's lost his father during the COVID period. He says it is because of the vaccine. I'm going to ask him why. And NN Khanna is a senior cardiologist and advisor to the Apollo Group of Hospitals. He's joining us on the broadcast as well. Alex Mitchell, I'm going to start with you first. We've now heard a term called TTS. TTS is something that you had to deal with personally. Could you tell us what had happened to you, how you made the link between your condition and the COVID vaccine, and what today means for you, what AstraZeneca's admission means to you and your lawsuit?
I received my AstraZeneca on the 20th of March, 2021. I was told verbally I would have cold flu-like symptoms or a sore site arm. And on the 1st of April 2021, I experienced muscle issues at my job. I struggled on for a couple of days, and then I collapsed at home. I was rushed to hospital and spent 7.5 hours having simultaneous clots removed from both legs and my lower abdomen. The result of which I'm now an amputee above the knee. As I left hospital, it was mentioned on my notes that this was thrombotic thrombocytopenia, thrombosis thrombocytopenia. Within 2 weeks, that was classified as a condition called vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia. It's much the same thing. The difference is that TTS doesn't affect the platelet PF4 factor the way that AstraZeneca does. I now have brain damage. I now have other issues. I have obviously been amputated twice now from above the knee.
Okay, so amputation is what you had to go through because of TTS. I understand that, which is why you dragged AstraZeneca to court. Dr. Aseem Malhotra, should we be surprised at AstraZeneca's admission in court. Yes, it's rare for a pharma company to come to court and admit. In fact, it's not even an admission. Actually, if you look at it, it's a U-turn. First, they said, no, you cannot link our vaccine to TTS. Now they are saying, in rare cases, you can do it. But then, you know, TTS can happen if you have been vaccinated. TTS can also happen if you have not taken our vaccine. I want to ask you, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, whether we know the full truth.
It's a great question. We don't know the full truth, but there's a lot of evidence that points in a certain direction. And that direction looks very, very bleak, unfortunately. So if you look at the yellow card reports in the UK, for example, so these are people who are reporting symptoms of side effects that are beyond mild, likely side effects of the vaccine. After 9.7 million doses in the UK, there were 800,000 such reports. This is unprecedented. And actually, by the summer of 2021, most European countries had suspended the AstraZeneca vaccine because of these issues of blood clots.
Correct.
Now, a more reliable figure, actually, I can explain to you now, is probably much, much higher in terms of serious adverse events. So by the summer of 2021, a comparison was made between Pfizer's vaccine, mRNA vaccine, and the AstraZeneca or the covishield vaccine. And by that time, they had, in published research, they had concluded that when it comes to very serious cardiovascular effects, heart attacks, strokes, blood clots, that the AstraZeneca vaccine had higher frequency than Pfizer. Now, the more rigorous analysis has been done and published on Pfizer's vaccine because that has had a much more distribution worldwide. And when one looks at that independently, the serious adverse event rate for Pfizer alone, and a lot of it being driven by blood clots, was 1 in 800. And in fact, one analysis independent of industry suggested that you were more likely to suffer serious harm from the Pfizer vaccine than you were to be hospitalized with COVID. Now, I think it's very likely that we will likely ultimately get very similar figures for the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is extremely disturbing. And I have been managing patients myself who've suffered from AstraZeneca, who've had heart attacks several months after having the vaccine, because one of the mechanisms is it likely accelerates heart disease. And in fact, in the last year, I was invited to give talks in AIMS in India, and also KDH Mumbai. I was invited by the Ambanis to give talks to doctors. And when I presented the data, there was not a single rebuttal. They understood what had happened. And unfortunately, this may ultimately go down as one of the biggest scandals in the history of medicine. And I just want to say one more thing before we carry on. I really am concerned that Adar Poonawalla, who is the CEO of the Serum Institute of India, has been very vocal on saying this was safe, even when it was being pulled in European countries. He gave a statement which has now been proven to be false, that he said it was 94% efficacious when it was less than 1%. And he's going after people who are calling out this vaccine by trying for defamation cases. He needs to be answerable on this as well. He needs to be held fully accountable for the statements he's made.
But Dr. Malhotra, fact also is that the WHO told us that yes, there was some risk involved, there were some cases of blood clotting, etc., but the benefits far outweighed the risks. And at a time like that, I'm playing the devil's advocate here, Dr. Malhotra.
I'll answer
during
that,
the time of COVID, during the time of COVID, we were all hoping for a miracle. And the vaccines, and the miracle was that these vaccines got produced, first made and then produced so quickly. Now,
So
there were even then eyebrows raised about the rollout, but did we have a choice? It was the best we had. We knew it wouldn't be perfect. We knew the first vaccine would not be perfect, but...
Yeah, very good points you raised. Three, very quickly, I won't go on too long. One, 70% of the Indian population had natural immunity by the time the vaccine was rolled out. We now know, and we should have known even then, I mean, this is basics of medicine, natural immunity is very, very protective. And actually, interestingly, certainly with Pfizer, if you had natural immunity, you already had COVID, and you had the vaccine, you were 3 times more likely to have side effects. Maybe very similar with AstraZeneca. WHO, I'm very sorry, I've had a lot of respect for the WHO for many, many years, but not anymore. They are not a credible organization because they are under commercial influence. Their former Director General, Margaret Chan, said 70% of the funding of the WHO comes with strings attached. Who is one of the biggest funders of the WHO? Bill Gates. Why is that a problem? He's heavily invested and made $500 million from COVID vaccines. They are not an independent organization. I'm sorry, and I've said this, even the Times of India quoted me on this. Until they remove commercial influence, the World Health Organization should not be trusted.
Okay. Can I just get in an Indian doctor here? Dr. N.N. Khanna, you've been listening to this conversation. For the first time, there is an admission by AstraZeneca in a UK court. 70 to 80%, in fact 90% if I'm not wrong, 90% of Indians have got covishield. We were told it's absolutely safe. Now looking back, maybe there were red flags that were ignored. It's clear that there were red flags that were ignored. Is it time for the Indian government to maybe take a safety review to, just get one going?
Yes, definitely. This is a very alarming news, and there were a lot of red flags which were raised. And the government, I would at this stage say, I mean, whenever a government or a government organization comes out with a statement, they should not put it like it's a very safe thing, there are no side effects. They should come with a rider that, okay, this is a time like a war. This is what we have in hand, and this is intention is to save people, but there are possible side effects. And having said that, one has to be very careful in post-marketing or post-vaccine surveillance of these patients, and especially when the news started coming in, I mean, after a few months that there has been more thrombotic risk. There were a lot of talks that no, this could not be because of vaccine, it was because of the COVID itself. That may be true to some extent. We don't know up till now whether it was COVID or COVID vaccine or combination of both. But then we had to keep our eyes open. We had to be very clear in our scientific understanding rather than passing statements and making it political that, oh, everything was very safe. And I would at this stage agree with the previous speaker on this. If you look at the timeline of vaccination in India, but first it was given to healthcare workers and then to the elderly people and then to people above 60 or 65 and then above 45. By the time you had first dose, which was not very protective, only first dose itself, most of us got the infection. And that was what produced immunity. And any vaccination after that probably was not required or probably created more harm. And there were, I know, many doctors who actually refused to take the second dose, and I think they were a little clever and they were more proactive in their understanding about these vaccines.
Dr. Khanna, and Dr. Malhotra, this question is for both of you.
And now is the time that we should review all our cases who had problems.
Yeah, Dr. Khanna and Dr. Malhotra, here's my question to you. Think of the poor viewer who is watching us right now, right? Ever since we saw the end of COVID, in the last 2 years, there have been multiple studies. And multiple studies have told us different things. An ICMR study in India is telling us that COVID vaccines have no link to cardiac arrest. Then there is a fresh study that tells us that there is a link. It's very confusing for us as viewers and as citizens of India and the world on what we should be believing, because there are multiple studies that constantly contradict each other. So I want to ask you, Dr. Khanna, in your experience, are the increased heart attacks in young people at some level linked to COVID and COVID vaccines? Yes or no?
Yes, they are linked, but we don't know whether it is linked to the vaccine or, a long-term effect of COVID, post-COVID. That we are not sure, but we have to keep our eyes open for both.
But ICMR, that is the Indian Council of Medical Sciences, backed by the government of India, has said there is no link. So doctors like you across the world are drawing a link, but a official government body is telling us there is no link. Dr. Aseem Malhotra, we have one admission from AstraZeneca about blood clots. Do you see more admissions coming as the case progresses? And if that happens,
I think so.
What does it mean?
Yeah, well, actually, I was actually a witness in the court of Finland only a couple of weeks ago, where an entrepreneur was taking action against the Finnish government and a catering company for introduction of the COVID pass. And the World Health Organization, one of their chief scientists, was under oath, said by December 2021 there was no indication. In fact, she advised that there was no reason for COVID passes because it gave people a false sense of security. It didn't protect against infection, didn't protect against transmission. I think court of law is definitely a way forward. But just opening this up a little bit further, I think to try and understand the confusion, because I'm a doctor, I see patients, I try to analyze data, what's reliable and what's not. I think the first thing to say is follow the money. And when you look at most medical research, certainly over the last couple of decades, unfortunately, there is huge financial influence. I mean, a man who I describe as a Stephen Hawking of medicine, Professor John Ioannidis of Stanford, actually said that most published research findings are false. And the greater the financial interest in a given field, the less likely the research findings are to be true. Unfortunately, big pharma have captured so many people, so many organizations with the amount of money they've got that, and this even applies, unfortunately, to senior academics. And you've got to understand the medical profession by nature are hierarchical and obedient. If we have people in positions of power who are too close to industry when it comes to the medical establishment, they are siding with industry interests, and industry is only there to make money. They have no legal responsibility to give the best treatment. And one, psychologist, in fact, eminent psychologist behind the International Classification of Psychopath, actually says, as entities, not individuals, as entities, big corporations, including big pharma, actually in the way they carry out their business, fulfill the criteria for psychopathy. Callous unconcern for the safety of others, repeated lying, deceitfulness, and conning others for profit, incapacity to experience guilt. And we've seen this extensively. I've studied this for years. And I think what we've seen with the COVID pandemic is just an exploitation, a further exploitation of a situation, a fearful situation. And this is why now we're dealing with the consequences of it.
Okay, so I think safely all three of us, four of us actually can agree on two things. A, do we know the full truth about the vaccines that were administered to us? Clearly, what has happened in a UK court, thanks to Alex Mitchell, that clearly tells us that we do not know the full truth. The only admission and the first admission we have so far is that AstraZeneca's vaccine is in rare instances linked to clotting. Were there other side effects as well? That is something that the world will need to find out. Should the Indian government now look at a safety review of our vaccines, especially Covishield? Probably that will be in the best interest of all us citizens. We'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much, Alex Mitchell. Yeah, you wanted to say something, Alex Mitchell. Go ahead.
Yes, very quickly. You said, who should we listen to? We should listen to the world-leading haematologist task force, the people that verified for TTS. Listen to the proper experts, not the pharmaceutical-sponsored ones, not the government-sponsored ones, independent experts, like Mr. Aseem Malhotra, who is an independent expert and cardiologist, and the gentleman, the esteemed gentleman that's on the show with us. These experts are telling you that there's a problem.
Okay.
So let's deal with the problem.
Alex Mitchell, Alex Mitchell, I think the world is grateful to you because it is because of people like you that we at least have one admission from AstraZeneca. As the case progresses, probably there'll be others as well. Best of luck with the case. Thank you very much. Dr. Aseem Malhotra, thank you very much for your time. And Dr. N.N. Khanna, thank you very much for your time as well. Thank you. This was a good chat. We all learned something. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I'm slipping into a quick break on the show. There's more on the other side. Do stay with us.